Hello, everybody. It's Rachel.
And it's Shirley. And we are back for our season 23 podcast for Podcasa Bonita. And it's been a minute, hasn't it?
It certainly has. Hello to everyone if you are just joining us again after a year. And hello again if you just finished listening to our Q&A podcast.
Yeah, we actually are doing something besides just one podcast a year. That's mostly my fault because I'm a busy adult now. But we're really excited to kind of like get back into the swing of things, talk about what we like and dislike about this season. And yeah, please listen to our Q&A or give us some ideas. We're definitely planning on doing things besides just these season reviews. But of course, we're not going to stop those anytime soon.
Yeah, we definitely have some new content planned for you guys, so give us some suggestions of things you'd like to see.
Not like we've been saying that for 3 years and not doing it, but, you know, now we're stuck in the house under a quarantine, so it's not like we have much else to do.
Very true. You want to dive right into the episodes?
Yeah, I'd say we can dive right into this episode. This was a fairly interesting season, I would say.
Agree.
Alrighty, so let's get started with episode number 1, Mexican Joker.
Aired September 25th, 2019.
When Tegridy Farm sales decline, Randy is angered and decides to take action. Kyle is sent to an ICE detention center and warns the agents that their poor treatment of children may have consequences.
I gotta say, this is one of the better season premieres they've had in a few years.
Oh yeah, like not even gonna lie, this is honestly one of my favorite episodes of the season. It's probably like second favorite. But no, we were actually talking about this before recording. Like, this has been probably the best premiere episode of a season because, not gonna lie, the past couple ones, they're not always bad, but they were a little bit boring. Let's not lie.
You can kind of tell that Matt and Trey are rusty.
A little bit rusty, but not in this case. This is a really great one. Mostly, surprise, surprise, not because of the Randy jokes, but because of the really, my personal favorite. I really love the commentary about ICE and the detention centers and literally putting children in cages. And this is actually, you know, we've had some complaints, and we have some in this season as well, where a lot of the times Matt and Trey will touch a subject, but they won't go like as hard on how unethical something might be. But this time they really did go all out, so it's very much appreciated.
Yeah, I especially kind of love the way that the ICE agents are portrayed in this episode, because, I mean, they are, on one hand, like, stupid South Park adults, and they're afraid of Mexican Joker, but they also are kind of just, like, casually being cruel to children, and they're just saying, like, oh, I'm just doing my job, and that's a very, like, poignant comparison to Nazis and the Holocaust.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's kind of an obvious comparison because it's very true. But I'm sorry, it shouldn't even be a political thing. Putting children in cages is bad no matter which president does it. Mm-hmm. It's just something that's extremely unethical, and I'm glad that they brought it up and didn't even have to make it a political thing, because I'm sorry, just a moral code shouldn't be something that's political in the first place. But, you know, it really, they made, you know, a lot of comments, and I liked this because, you know, Cartman is super stoked about the idea that you can call people that you don't like and just get rid of them. Like, that's quite literally what he says. He says, oh my god, this is amazing. You can just call people that you don't like anymore in this country and just get them locked up. And that kind of makes you realize that Cartman is never really somebody that you want to side with in general. He's the person who embodies the bad things in the world. He's the person that's completely ethically, you know, he's not the most ethical person, and his opinions are meant to represent kind of like the evil in the world, really. So I'm like, if you have those same opinions as Cartman, it's kind of saying something about you, you know. Because he's stoked about this, you know. that's something that you shouldn't really be excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of embodied by this really great line that Kyle has where he goes, "I'm just here because some fat, intolerant asshole didn't want me around." And then some other, like, immigrant kid goes, "Hey, me too."
You know, and again, I will 100% praise South Park on actually saying what needed to be said. Was when they find out, when they're doing the roll call and they say Bravlovsky and they say, "Oh my God, we can't keep a white kid in here. People will think we're racist." Like, because, you know, it's not white kids being in prison. They would never do that. So it was something pretty bold of them to say, but it's something that needed to be said in order to really tackle this issue on what it truly is.
Absolutely, I agree. And although Cartman is a total asshole in this episode, he is pretty funny, actually. I love the whole scene where Cartman ends up in the detention center, too. And the way he just so casually is like, "Oh, yeah, Stan got mad at me for calling ice on you, so he called ice on me." It's like, I just love that Cartman is, like, so used to his plans going off the rails that, like, it doesn't faze him anymore.
And I also love that even he is the one that can make the connection. I laughed my ass off when he goes, "Oh, my God. Oh, no, I realize, but this really bothers you. Oh, shoot." Like, if even Cartman can make that comparison, the general public can make that comparison. So, I think the topic was handled, like, really well because they really didn't shy away from how unethical it is.
Yeah. Although, okay, so unfortunately there is a subplot involving Randy that we should probably talk about.
Get ready, because we talk about it just about every season that Randy's in, and I know we sound like rabid fans that just honestly hate Randy because he's the older character, but that's not really the reason. It's just because he's not funny. He's really not a likable character in this season for a lot of reasons, and of course we'll get to those. This episode, he's not like... The thing is, Cartman works in a way. He's an antagonist a lot in the ways because he's not really the person that wins. He doesn't end up winning in the situations he's put in. That's how you structure a successful storyline when you're trying to punish a character for doing something bad. You want your audience to feel some sort of satisfaction knowing that the person that did wrong is getting punished. And that's where Randy doesn't work. Randy constantly does things that are just unlikable. And he's basically becoming, I think we've said this before, but he's essentially like a Peter Griffin, which, if any of you guys know my opinion on more recent South Park, or more recent Family Guy episodes, not really a compliment at all. And I think the show is very self-aware. They make continuous, which we'll talk a little bit about more in later episodes, but they make constant references to, we're tired of Tegridy Farms, obviously calling out, the viewers and everything who are tired of Randy. But, like, I'm sorry, it's just kind of flimsy, ironic lampshading where they will talk about how, Randy's annoying a good chunk of the fans, but they're not going to actively do anything to improve the situation. So that would be the biggest downside of this issue, is he's just so damn unlikable. He's not even funny, in my opinion, in a lot of things that he does, and he's just constantly rewarded by being successful in these things and not really being punished for anything by just being an asshole.
Yeah, I will say that I actually have to give them credit this season, is that they seem incredibly aware of how big of a dick Randy's being this season, and being a bad husband and a bad father, particularly to Shelley. I feel like in a lot of the other seasons, they kind of, like, have Randy be doing stuff that's, like, kind of funny, but mostly just makes him come off as a dick, and they, like, kind of don't seem to realize that he's being a dick. At least now, they seem to be very much aware of it, and they have the other characters' reactions mirror that, which I appreciated.
See, it's very different from a really good episode of Randy, like Medicinal Fried Chicken. Randy does something really stupid, but it's only really hurting himself, but it's played off as funny. It's not actively really bothering the characters around him. You know, Sharon loves his giant balls, and all the townsfolk are super happy with their giant cancer balls. But in that episode, what he's doing isn't really harming anybody on a storytelling level. You know, people aren't really irritated. He's fun to watch. He's doing something stupid and damaging, but he's fun to watch, and he kind of does have, like, he has kind of like a character growth through it. In these episodes, and a lot of the previous Randy episodes, he just does things that are really shitty, and they're just kind of ignored. It's like, haha, look at the shitty thing he did. It's like, okay, well, is it funny, though? Not really.
Yeah, definitely. I will say one of the things that I actually liked about the Tegridy Farm storyline, which isn't a bunch, is I actually kind of enjoyed the new intro. I liked that, like, Randy and Towley were in it. I loved that the text was all, like, Comic Sans, because that's such, like, a dad thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, and I also loved it was pretty repetitive, but I thought it was really funny, making it like a sitcom. So whenever they had, like, a shot change on Tegridy Farms, it would play, like, 80s theme music in the back, like things from Happy Days and All in the Family and stuff like that. I thought that was kind of clever. And it didn't get too old because they didn't overdo it. But I think it was a really good episode to start. This also isn't necessarily the most annoying of Tegridy Farms because it is the beginning. It is the beginning of Randy, so we haven't quite been worn out with him. So I still can watch this one and enjoy it for what it is. But most of my enjoyment comes from the other subplot and not Randy's plot.
Totally agree. Do you want to go to the next one?
Let's go to the next one, which is Banned in China.
Aired October 2nd, 2019.
Randy wants to sell his marijuana in the Chinese market, but is imprisoned after marijuana is found in his luggage. Stan, Kenny, Jimmy, and Butters form a death metal band, which attracts a filmmaker that wants to tailor their biopic for Chinese audiences. So, a lot of the times, I really appreciated this episode. This is another really good one that I enjoyed. Because a lot of the times in South Park, so especially with more of the recent seasons, there have been things that Matt and Trey will talk about. They're a little bit on the rich people problems kind of focus. You know, it's sometimes they're not as relatable because it's for a very specific demographic. A lot of the times they talk about things that a lot of, like, wealthy people only have access to. Kind of similar to, like, the one episode where they thought they ripped on Obamacare, but it was really just, like, the in-house computer system or whatever. But this is actually an example where it kind of works in their benefit, because they are talking about, like, screenwriters and everything and censorship, which is kind of like a big Hollywood issue. But in that sense, it also impacts us as casual viewers. So they are talking about something that I haven't really heard of, I haven't really been exposed to as much, but it's still something that I can find some of myself in. I can relate to it because I'm part of the lay public. So really interesting that they talked about a topic that is kind of a niche market, but really affects everybody just in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely agree with everything you said. I was really, really drawn to the Stan storyline, mostly just because I like Stan way more than Randy. But also, I just love that that he has, like, a death metal band, which is so funny to me, and I love that it's kind of connected to this emotional arc that Stan has of hating living on the farm, and I just love that whenever they perform their stupid band, and, like, it's like, blah, 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 I hate this farm. Like, that's the only thing you can understand.
I will say, the part that made me laugh, like, one of the hardest is, you know, hearing Stan's metal professional voice and then hearing Butters go, "Get me off this farm!" Yeah. You can, like, scatter throughout that. That was genius. That was so funny. Just, like, kind of one of those, it's just very classic Butters. So really enjoyed that. Of course, I actually didn't mind Randy's part in this story because it wasn't much about annoying his family back home, I guess. Not as much. Definitely did with poor Stan, to his dad not seeing his beautiful performance.
Wait, didn't Randy get like arrested this episode? Did his family even notice?
This is also the episode where the fuck you came into play, which is a fun running joke through the season, because he thinks that everybody's stealing his idea, which is very Randy. It's very Randy, very self-focused and everything. But I thought it was kind of where he keeps playing, where he'll be talking normally like business, and then all of a sudden he switched to like Tegridy. He gets that homegrown kind of Southern charm vibe that he's so very good at. But I appreciated Randy's storyline really just more for the educational value and kind of really understanding the censorship issue in the Chinese market and everything. Not just because of how it impacts like us Western citizens, but definitely because it really opened my eyes to how Chinese workers are treated, especially with their rights to speech and everything. So I'm not trying to make a statement or anything, but
yeah, one of the really significant parts of this episode that I liked was that Mickey Mouse came back, and he was just as funny and scary as ever.
Their Mickey Mouse is like one of the best recurring like tertiary characters. I like it when they go, Randy Marsh, do I own that yet? He says, not yet, sir. So really funny jab at Disney, even though I love them so much. They do scare me completely as a monopoly. But I definitely think this is like a really well-structured episode. Of course, one of the highlights is Winnie the Pooh. They keep talking about, like, they keep saying, like, look it up, it's a real thing. So I really think Matt and Trey want us to look this up, because it is a real thing. But definitely like a gory, thing that South Park's kind of known for certain episodes. A lot of gore in this episode, but it's done, I guess, as tastefully as you possibly could do gore and killing off Winnie the Pooh like that.
I think Piglet might disagree, but that's okay. Another part of this episode that I really loved was the whole storyline where Stan and his band are trying to make like a biopic, and just because that was like such a clear parody of like the recent biopics like Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody, and it was really, really clever. And I liked how it segued into Finger Bang coming back. That was the thing that happened. And then I just loved the end where Stan just stops and he says, no, I can't do this. I can't sell my soul for money, blah, blah. Because it really kind of reminded me of like the old South Park days where it was like, I learned something today. And it just shows that like, because Stan isn't willing to sell his soul to China just to make a quick buck. And then you see in this episode that Randy is willing to do that. And I think it's really, really clever the way that Matt and Trey kind of set up this stark difference between Randy and his family, and kind of like sets up that contrast and that conflict there.
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way, but I'm boring, so guess I wouldn't have thought it that way. But I like that point. It's definitely it's a nice standout episode. I would say Randy's used pretty well in this episode, but again, if I had my choice, I really enjoy Stan's storyline. Because I love him, and I, again, was very happy Finger Bang came back out. It was very much like a classic South Park episode, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this one might have been my favorite of the season, actually.
Oh, really? You ready to move on to my favorite of the season?
I am. Let's go.
Which is the 300th episode of the series. Major congrats to them, which is Shots.
Aired October 9th, 2019.
In the series' 300th episode, Sharon is angered by the self-centered endeavors with which Randy chooses to celebrate a milestone achieved by their farm. Cartman's fear of needles prompts him to express fears that vaccines might make him artistic. So yeah, my favorite episode, not just because it's the 300th episode, I am very passionate about the pro-vax movement. Mm-hmm. I, as somebody who works in child development and has worked with children their entire life, I study medicine and neuroscience. I care a lot about vaccination and herd immunity. And I really honestly can't talk too much about anti-vaxxers and the anti-vax community because they make me so angry. Because not a single point of theirs is valid. I'm actually not sorry to any anti-vaxxer that may be listening. But it was nice. I was kind of anticipating them to cover this topic because of the traction that the anti-vax community has gained, unfortunately. But I think they did the pro-vax movement some justice by being rational and actually stating facts and showing that Cartman, of course, of all people, is the one that is the anti-vaxxer.
Yes, definitely. And I love that it's also for, like, entirely selfish reasons, too. And then he tries to, like, pretend it's political. For an episode that has Cartman, like, squealing like a pig, they also had some pretty sound facts that support vaccination, which I really appreciated.
Not only do I like this episode because it talks about something that I'm extremely passionate about in a very eloquent way. That being said, I think it could have been a little bit more similar to, like, Mexican Joker. I think they could have gone a little bit further with the joke, mostly because Leanne's action at the end was a little bit confusing, where she's like, I know what's best for my child and everything. I'm like, sometimes you don't. That's the thing. Sometimes you very much don't. No. There are reasons why we have laws and regulations in place, but I do think they could have gone a little bit further, but again, with what they said everything accurately. They brought up some really important facts, and not only that, this episode was really funny. It made me laugh so hard. Every time Cartman ran around and was squealing like a pig, it was hilarious. I also laughed my ass off when Leanne said, "No shot, no toy!" Like, that was kind of nice. That kind of wrapped her storyline up really well. Of course, the twist at the end, with her becoming artistic, was really hilarious. It really just kind of poked fun at the anti-vax community, which I am always down for.
Yeah, definitely. I largely agree. I mean, I, for the most part, enjoyed this episode, but I also wish that they had gone harder. I felt like they almost, like, took it easy on the anti-vaxxers, which I wasn't expecting at all. And from watching the episode and listening to the message, because it seems like they overall support vaccinations, because with all the facts they dropped, I think they clearly think that it's the right move, but they did seem to be a little more sympathetic to anti-vaxxers than I was expecting, where the message essentially was, look, I get it, it can be hard to try to make the right decision for your kid, and it can be scary trying to figure out what to do. And I just think that this definitely is because they like, Matt and Trey both have kids now. And I feel like if they did this episode like 10 years ago before they had kids, they would have been way meaner. That's what I think.
They would have been way meaner to these children that didn't want shots. Like, we talked about this earlier, before we started recording, how, a couple of, long before they had children, if you guys remember the ADHD episode where they had the pop you in the mouth method, where they just said sit down and study as a form of treating ADHD. I don't think an episode like that would be out here because, simply put, it was before Matt and Trey, and a lot of the writers were actually parents. So I do agree. I think they're a little bit more, I wouldn't actually go to say sympathetic with the anti-vax community. I think they're very much, pro-vax because of the general message. But I think they were very sensitive to parents being unsure and wanting their children to be happy and safe. Because it's definitely difficult. My mom is a registered nurse, and she gave dozens of shots and IVs to hundreds of kids long before she had me, and she cried her eyes out when I got my first vaccinations because I was crying. And, it's difficult to watch because you don't want to see your children in pain. But it's nice that they really did bring in those facts. But I agree. I think they did go a little bit softer than what they could have. But I think it's because they're parents now. So I think they're definitely more sensitive to how children feel,
Yeah. Okay, so I really wanted to talk just a few more about, like, scenes and lines that I liked. One was that I loved that when the part where Cartman, like, is pretending to be an anti-vaxxer, like, pretending that he cares. And he's like, well, what if vaccines made my friend Timmy the way he is? What if they made Jimmy the way he is? What if they made Token the way he is? That was so funny. And then unfortunately there also was a Randy subplot that I kind of forgot about. But I guess this is the one where, like, I think the Marshes are, like, totally unenthused about Tegridy Farms, which is funny because it's, like, a stand-in for the audience, I think. And I love the scene where, like, Randy and Mrs. Cartman are, like, talking and bonding. And I, like, totally thought they were going to fuck when I first saw that part.
Wouldn't put it past Randy at this point. Honestly, the anti-vax message stands out so much, and I think it's done pretty well, to the point that I just really don't even remember much of what happened with Randy. He's honestly, that's like the biggest crime that you can commit for South Park, is just being, like, forgettable, you know? Like, even if I don't necessarily like a message or something, at least I can remember it. You know, he's just boring.
Yeah, if I didn't have it in my notes, I wouldn't have remembered that he was even in this one.
I will say I do like how they did use it to tie in, like, 300. Mm-hmm. You know, that was kind of cute. It was kind of cute. You know, it's different than what they did. You know, they've done something different for every 100 episodes. They had, like, the, you know, concert kind of thing, country versus rock and roll for the first 100. Then they had that really big blowout two-parter series for 200. This one, it was just like a cutesy way of doing it, because I guess it's just not as special anymore.
Yeah.
It's really not as special when you've been going on for 23 seasons and get renewed for, like, what is it, like 3 more after this? You know, it's not quite as special, but it was a cute way of incorporating it.
I agree. Are you ready to go on to the next one?
I think I am. The next one is Let Them Eat Goo.
Aired October 16th, 2019.
After a decrease in marijuana sales, Randy decides to take advantage of plant-based food to sell more of it. Carmen suffers from a heart attack after the cafeteria changes to a plant-based diet.
Okay, I just gotta say that my favorite part of this episode is there's a Carmen, like, having multiple heart attacks and being like, yeah, the girls tried to kill me, but they will not succeed. Like, just being so dramatic about it.
This is kind of sad, but the part that made me laugh the hardest in the entire season was actually from this episode, and it's just when it's after they've formulated the marijuana burgers, and it pans out, he's like, and you can eat as many of them as you want without feeling bloated. Like, Towley's already at his 20th, and then it just pans over into a chunky Towley just burying his face in a friggin' burger, and I laughed so...
And he's, like, high out of his mind.
I laughed so hard at that, because it was just... Like, Towley is... If they're gonna do this plot line, I'd rather just have it just be Towley by itself, because Towley is far more entertaining than Randy will ever be, because that shit was the funniest part of the entire Tegridy storyline, in my opinion.
It's okay. Another gag that I liked was the one where after Cartman has both of his heart attacks and he ends up, like, in the ambulance or whatever, and the paramedics are working on him and everyone's, like, staring and like, oh my god, and then he, like, is revived and he goes, fuck you, Wendy. I'm like, okay, that's pretty funny, but I think it would have been way funnier if, like, all the kids, like, groaned when he came back to life.
That's very true. Carmen is actually kind of funny, and he does bring up, like, a pretty valid point with, like, the more health conscious side of eating on a vegan diet, which I'm 100%, like, I'm not a vegan, but I'm always like, yo, that's cool if you have enough self-control and, like, the desire to eat vegan, by all means, go for it. But it doesn't necessarily always equate a healthy diet either, because he's just like, I wasn't worried about the plant-based, I was just worried you were going to start feeding me healthy shit. Like, thing is, you can eat a diet of, like, only Oreos, and that's still technically vegan. So, it is kind of funny when people equate going vegan as being perfectly healthy, which in a lot of cases it definitely can be. Of course, there are a lot of wonderfully healthy vegan options as long as you're taking supplements and everything. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a dietitian, so I'm not going to tell you how to eat. But, you know, it is kind of funny where it's just like, it's not always 100%. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're healthy.
Yeah, definitely. I liked that this episode was kind of classic South Park where they kind of ripped on both sides. Like, they made fun of the plant-based burgers for, like, tasting like shit and being horrible, but they also, like, made fun of the people protesting them because, like, if it's made in a factory, how is it any different than all the other fast food that you eat?
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I didn't really like the killing the cows scene and how in-depth it went, just because it was... like, they've done gore, you know, of course, like, the Winnie the Pooh part was, like, really gory, but it just, like, it dragged on for a little while, and at that point, it was just like, okay.
Alright, Shirley, are you ready to go to the next episode?
I am very ready to go on to the next episode, which is Tegridy Farm's Halloween special.
It aired October 30th, 2019.
Randy's daughter Shelley has issues with Randy and his marijuana farming. Butters has a problem with a mummy who's very manipulative in their relationship.
I guess, really, all I gotta say about the mummy storyline is like, okay, Trey, we get it, you're getting a divorce.
I don't even know if he's still getting a divorce or not. Like, is it, like, cause, like, she's still posting all the pictures with them together.
I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, they're still separating. I guess they're just handling it well. But this, to me, like, felt very, like, Trey was, like, airing his grievances about his marriage.
It was very, like, yeah, it felt a little bit, it was funny at first, but then it just kind of kept going. I just kind of felt bad for Butters in the end, which I guess was the intention.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was cute. I loved little archaeologist Butters. That was really sweet. But it didn't have, like, a whole lot of jokes in it, really. It did kind of feel like somebody was airing out their dirty laundry. But that being said, you know, it is a good message to have. That sometimes there's really not much that you can do in a relationship. That's definitely a sign of a toxic partner, is somebody who consistently puts the blame on you and has very rough mood swings. Okay. I feel like we've had episodes pretty similar to this before that were just kind of more memorable and funnier. It wasn't a complete loss for me. It was just kind of one of those episodes that's very forgettable, you know?
Yeah, I will say that I much more... Actually, it's a rare case where I more enjoyed the Tegridy Farm storyline, but that's, like, only because of Shelley. She was really funny this episode.
Shelley's honestly, like, a really great character. I really have enjoyed whenever she's been explored.
Yeah, same.
So, it's a good sign. It's good that they're, you know, showing the perspectives of the other Marsh family members and not just Stan and Randy. So it was really interesting because they easily could have made this storyline Stan's storyline, but I feel like they already did that with Band in China. So it was cool getting to see Shelley's perspective of it. I like her little witchy chant. You know, it's just kind of sadly just more of like not even a boring episode, just pretty forgettable.
Yeah, I didn't have much to say about this one. I did like the whole gag where it turns out that like Randy and Tally were just super high and like nothing bad was happening at all. And yeah, I agree that I liked the way that they had Shelley in this episode because this kind of is the introduction of them, like, kind of examining the whole Marsh family and how, like, all three of them are all, like, kind of done with Randy's shit. And they kind of explore, like, all three characters, which is nice.
It is nice. So that is one good part of the Tegridy Farms kind of line, because even though Randy isn't necessarily, like, punished for his behavior, we do at least see that he's not just benefiting, from everything that he's doing. Like, people are aware that it's a stupid idea that's problematic and tearing his family apart. So, as happily as I said that, but I just really, I kind of forgot about this episode a little bit. I did like that they had, like, the physical... Actually, I think that's next episode, but I'll talk about it anyway. They had... They give each of the episode names their own, like, little jars of weed. You know, like, their own little brands of marijuana. So, like, that was kind of cute and clever, but I think that happens next episode anyway. So, again, just kind of boring. Not like my least favorite or anything, but, just kind of there. It's got a couple laughs here and there.
Yeah, like, this episode isn't bad by any means, but I feel like they have so many other, like, Halloween episodes that are way funnier and way better.
I do, and I will also say it happened in the first episode, but it kind of continues. Sorry, that's my foster dog coughing in the background. Hopefully he doesn't throw up on my bed. But I will say that one thing with Tegridy Farms is it does open up a little bit of social commentary about large businesses kind of profiting off of smaller businesses, like Randy destroying people who just want to grow their own marijuana and everything. Again, happens in the first episode, but it's kind of a theme that goes throughout every single episode. Where it's kind of like a lot of industries, like the medical industry, and I'm not trying to sound like a big pharma conspiracist or whatever, but Towelie talks about how you've just turned into somebody who wants to profit off of something that should be available to everybody, that should be your true intention. And that's a lot like the medical industry, profiting off of things like insulin and there are a couple, like, other things that I could, like, think of with certain brands that, it's kind of like a little mini social commentary on those a little bit. Not super extensive, but it is a thematic trait in this season that I did appreciate.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I definitely feel like that's probably going to be more commented on in the next episode. Do you want to go to that one?
Yeah, we'll go on to that one, which... don't be fooled, we still have plenty more to go, but this one is titled Season Finale.
Aired November 6th, 2019.
Rady's accused of bombing private marijuana fields and wants President Garrison to help him defend himself. The White family adopts 2 kids detained by ICE after the death of their son. Speaking of which, that death is, like, kind of big, because even though Jason's not, like, a big name character, he's been around for a long time, and he's in a couple of the games. But it is kind of funny having the White family back. That's always... They did that the last season. They talked about, the White family as a metaphor for white people. It's kind of funny when they do that. It's not overdone, in my opinion. They talk about, like, nobody cares what the whites think. And also, very similar to Mexican Joker, it went really heavy-handed on how unethical it is that children who are technically citizens because they were born in the United States are getting adopted by other families while their actual parents are being deported, like, without any sort of consent. So they just outright talked about another really, really touchy issue, which, props to them. They did it pretty well without undermining how serious it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the way that the concentration camps are portrayed. I liked it the way they're portrayed in Mexican Joker too, but I also really liked this one especially because it very much felt like it was like, oh, this is like an animal shelter, basically. Like, that was the parody. And it was funny, but it also really shows how much these kids are being dehumanized. And how, like, that's how they get away with it, is that they try to convince you that they're not people. They're just, like, basically pets that you can, like, shop for or forget about.
Exactly. And, they made it, comical in a way, but it still highlighted the severity of the issue, which is something that South Park is usually pretty good at. As for like a regular joke, I thought it was really funny when they just did "Estoy bien, y tú?" like for every single response. I am in no way fluent, but I could understand everything that Alejandro was saying. And the fact that he became like Mexican Joker at the end was really funny. But it was all around like it was portrayed really, really, really well. I think it had a really good balance of just like regular haha jokes versus like actual serious commentary.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also love that he became the Mexican Joker. I thought that was like a great way to tie it back in with the premiere. And again, it was like a great message. It kind of shows you, well, if you like stereotype these immigrant people as like monsters or as dangerous, and you continue to dehumanize them, and then it might cause them to become that because of the mistreatment that you've given them. And so it kind of just goes into this vicious cycle. And I think they handled it really well, where they kind of showed like, well, no, like the whites very clearly like made Mexican Joker.
They really did. And it's really the highlight of this episode for me. I think that's really the best part. Of course, we have the Randy. It's going to sound so repetitive, us saying, like, and then there's the Randy subplot that we don't really care about. This, again, ties into what I mentioned for the prior episode. It was kind of funny to have Garrison, like, come back. There's a lot of fodder, and there has continued to be a lot of fodder for Matt and Trey to make jokes about Trump. It's very easy. There's a lot of material there. But this one was a pretty good one without it being like too obvious. It's his like deflecting and constantly being protected by his staff and being completely incompetent. Like, what else is new? Yeah. But Garrison it was just enough of that parody to make it funny, but without being too depressing.
Yeah, I definitely think that Garrison coming back is like one of the more interesting parts of the storyline. I also really like that the Martians are like so stoked when they find out that Randy's gonna like go to jail. That's so funny.
We just have to keep being hopeful, like their realization and everything. Like, that was actually kind of funny, but I almost feel bad about it being funny,
Yeah, it's like deeply sad, but like in a really twisted, funny way. So I'm into it.
I'm into it. I'm happy that they are at least self-aware. Matt and Trey constantly in lines will say, we're sick of Tegridy Farms, we're sick of this and all that. It's like they're very much aware that their audience is getting a little bit tired. At least a good chunk of their audience. There is still a lot of people who watch that love the Randy stuff. I don't get it, but they do.
Can't relate. I also like the part at the end, I think, where Randy's like kind of becoming getting his moral compass back in a way, and he goes, I've forgotten I have a loving wife and son. Poor Shelley gets so mad in the audience.
It's like, wow, way to go, South Park, you pulled a Meg Griffin.
Yeah.
That shit was mean. It was funny enough though. But again, it's just Randy just kind of being Randy, and he's not really the best part about this episode. Not even close to it.
Yeah, I will say, though, I do like his kind of speech at the end, where he goes, maybe the president has brought down my moral meter. I don't mean to cast blame. I'm to blame. But ever since he was elected, I've compared my morals to his, and no matter how awful I am, I'm never as bad as the president, so I'm okay. I really, really liked this, speech, because it kind of, encapsulates his whole arc, I guess, up to this point. And also, I mean, it does speak to something that's really, really true. I mean, it does kind of feel like America is kind of fucked up right now because of what's okay now because of our president.
Mm-hmm. It's like, if something that severe isn't going to be punished, then dang, I'm okay for just doing things that are completely unethical and just doing things that are shitty to other people and exploiting things because, hey, look at the most powerful person in our country right now. They aren't getting punished for it. So, we'll probably get off our soapbox for that and whatever. But I think I agree, that was really a highlight for Randy's arc, is his realization. Because I will say, as tedious as his storylines may be, there was some character growth. It wasn't extensive, and it kind of phased out by the end of the season, but there was a little bit of character growth from the beginning of the season to this point forward.
Definitely. Do you want to go on to the next episode?
Let's go on to Bored Girls.
Aired November 13th, 2019.
Strong woman deals with a transgender athlete who has her own agenda. When the girls want to join boys' gaming club, the boys object, but the girls prove to be strong gamers. So, here it is, the elephant in the room. This is probably my least favorite.
Definitely my least favorite.
Least favorite of the season, excuse me. And it has some highlights, I will say. Again, this is just the season of the superior B-plots. Like, there are so many B-plots in this season, which hasn't happened very frequently, I would say. But they're all better than the actual story that they're trying to tell. All of them, But the thing is, I'll get the fun part out of the way. I really loved the girls, the young fourth grade girls, getting inspired about gaming. That's really cute because, it is very gender inclusive, and it's shown in such like a positive light that and the boys minus Carbon actually start to transition and be like, oh, okay, wow, this is totally fine. Like, it's completely doable to integrate, especially at a young age, to integrate genders and have them actually do things together. So I thought that storyline was really wholesome and really just enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I like that they brought in board games because I know from interviews that Trey really likes board games, so I'm sure this was a fun episode for him. And I also love that Cartman's board games club was called Dice Studs with a Z. I thought that was very Cartman. And I agree that it was a sweet episode about integrating and having boys and girls play together. But I will say that I love my son Stan because he was the only one that was fine about the girls joining the whole time.
And I love that he was I love the comment that Kyle makes. He's like, dude, you're really into board games. Him just talking about it, because I thought that was really sweet. It's always just fun when you get a little niche characteristic of certain characters, like that tiny little thing. And I don't know, when Kyle talks about finger painting, that little shit. I live for that stuff. So that was fun. But do you want to start talking about things that are not great about this episode?
Yeah. I guess I'll just dive into the whole trans storyline, which I really didn't like. Okay, so I didn't enjoy this episode, or I didn't enjoy this storyline. Not even necessarily because I agreed or disagreed with what they were trying to say. It's just okay, so the whole trans thing in this episode is that this man essentially is pretending to be a woman so he can beat up all the women in the competition. And if you kind of look at that and think about South Park's history with trans issues, they almost always have quote unquote trans people but they're actually cis people just pretending to be trans. Even the sissy, it's all the trans people are just actually Cartman or Wendy dressing up to prove a point or whatever. And it kind of I don't know, it's just, it really bothers me because it kind of enforces this stereotype that transgender people are just they're not real, they're all faking it, they're just cisgender people pretending for their own personal gain or whatever. And that's and that part of it really kind of shows the bias, I think, from Matt and Trey a little bit. Not that they're full-on transphobic, I don't think that, but this is definitely a step back from the sissy, which was such a great episode. And I especially didn't like this episode because of the fact that there's no, like, legitimate trans athletes in this episode. It's just PC Principal versus Heather Swanson or whatever. And there's no other trans people to comment or say how it affects them or give their opinion or anything. And I'm not, like, the whole message really bugged me where it's like, oh, well, this is a complex issue. And, like, I'm not, like, that's fine. I'm not saying we can't have this conversation. It's just, it's very presented like, oh, well, we should be able to talk about this without being called transphobic. And it's like, okay, well, then it kind of seems like you don't care about the issue at all. You don't care about trans people. It's just cis people on the defense, like, being like, well, you can't say that I'm transphobic for talking about it. It's like, oh, really? That's your message?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The thing I have the most issues with is this episode would be completely different if the trends that they're portraying were actually happening in real life. Okay? Like, again, it goes kind of hand in hand with not having a positive representation of an actual trans person to voice that other side of the issue. Thing is, being a trans person in real life, just statistically speaking, it's not a pleasant life. Okay? And I'm not speaking for all trans people or anybody thinking about transitioning or anything. Just on a statistical level, it's not something that you genuinely fake. And you don't benefit from faking it. That's the thing. And this episode almost implies that you benefit from being a trans person unfairly. You know, which just isn't something that actually happens. Like, they're almost it's like they're creating a fake issue because they want to be on the defense for being called transphobic. Like, it's genuinely, and of course this episode isn't anywhere near as transphobic as Garrett Edison's Fancy New Vagina. In a way, I think it could have really started a really positive narrative about integrating sports in general, because I'm actually, not to sound like that liberal arts degree college kid or whatever, but, you know, after, like, studying really, like, gender in sports and gender integration, it really, of course, there are definitely physical differences, especially after puberty, between cis males and females. Of course there are. But that just enforces a gender stereotype that men are, by default, more powerful and better at sports than women are, which just is kind of a logical fallacy, because through gender socialization, again, I will get off my soapbox eventually, but through gender socialization, really anybody has the potential to be a successful athlete. More people would benefit, theoretically, more people would benefit from gender integration into sports than they would not benefit. So they could have talked about something like that, but no, the only argument that they kind of brought up was physical differences, and making it seem like all of a sudden, if a trans female athlete joined a women's athletic group, that all of a sudden they'd beat them by default. Like, because cis women are inferior physically to cis men. It's just a logical fallacy, in my opinion, and it's creating an issue that they can just put themselves on the defense for. It's not actually a real trend that's happening. So, in general, to me, their argument is flawed from the beginning, because there isn't really much of anything to argue against if you're just creating a fake issue.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like, no, I mean, I don't mind you talking about that. That's totally true. But I'm like, I already kind of got on my own soapbox. I didn't like this episode. It was the whole trans episode. The whole storyline was bad. The message was bad. Let's just go on.
It was just, like, honestly, I don't even think their intention was to be transphobic or anything, or just genuinely hateful. But it was just more tone deaf than anything. It didn't really have a logical argument to anything, you know? And it wasn't funny, really. But I will say, there's it's like a weird in-between from being like progressive with the sissy and regressive with Mr. Garrison, where they still like respect the person's pronouns. So like that's always like a positive thing, is like enforcing people's pronouns, like no matter what. But you know, it just was really tone deaf, and I couldn't excuse it. I can't ever excuse like just blatant transphobia, but like at least make it funny. You know, like Heather Swanson just really wasn't funny. It was just like a play on a WWE, so like it's just, I don't know, it was just pretty boring to say the least. But I will say I do love the PC Babies. I like the PC Babies return. It was funny getting a new intro for that. But really that and the actual board games are something that's actually nice about this episode. But really that's just kind of it.
Yeah, agree. Are you ready to go on?
Let's go on to Turd Burglars.
Aired November 27th, 2019.
Kyle begins worrying over the fact that he has millions of microbes, living all over him. Cartman, Kenny, and Stan steal feces from Sheila in exchange for the new Star Wars game.
Okay, so just to start off, I love this, like, so the whole thing is, like, Sheila had this fecal transplant or whatever, and I love the storyline where, like, Kyle and Ike are, like, desperate for people to not find out about it, like, so worried about getting made fun of, but of course, like, their mom is, like, Sheila, so she's, like, immediately, like, screaming about it. So it's like, they were really kind of doomed from the start, like, it was never gonna be a secret.
No, it was never going to be. And I will say, again, with the new, I think it was really cute that they did different intros towards the end. I like, this is the ones for the girls. Wish it had been a slightly better episode. I didn't actually care much for this episode when it first released. But watching it again, I was like, okay, yeah, it had some, like, pretty funny moments. I liked it because it felt like a standalone episode again. I liked the formatting of it because you could watch this one and it felt a little bit like classic South Park. Mm-hmm. You know, you had a little bit of like gross out humor, of course, like your toilet humor. I felt like the spice joke was really repetitive. I think because this issue, like the ideas of a fecal transplant is just so arbitrary and so ridiculous, I felt like they really could have, like, I felt like they really should have maybe gone inverse with how people reacted to it. Instead of being stoked about it, they should have gone, like, completely, because the idea itself is so ridiculous. I think it would have been funnier if, you know, people were like, oh yeah, if more people were like Kyle, you know, and it's like, nope, this is gross, this is lame. But of course, all the adults in South Park kind of suck, so we can never have somebody like that smart. It just, a lot of the jokes felt a little bit flat to me, but it wasn't the worst. It definitely had the potential to be a little bit better, I would say.
Yeah, I think by far my favorite joke is, I mean, obviously I love the storyline where they're, like, trying to steal poop from Kyle's mom. And I also love how there was, like, a gag this episode where they would continually, like, go into people's thoughts. And, like, especially I loved the Kenny one where he's, like, dressed up as, like, a dying child. He's like, why did I agree to this? I don't even have a PlayStation. That was really funny.
It was cute.
I'll say that I think my least favorite part of this episode about, like, it's like one for the girls, right? It's about women, but I think the women were, like, my least favorite part of it. Just because of how they were, like, portrayed. I didn't like that, like, Sheila and her friends were all, like, they're all, like, petty and, like, conniving, and they, like, all talk shit about each other, and it's, like, they're all back. I'm like, well, okay, like, women aren't really like that. Like, that's just, like, a stereotype of what men think women are like.
Exactly. It was overdone, so I guess in a lot of ways it kind of is funny. It's, like, similar in The Stick of Truth, where the girls group always talks about, like, who's the two-faced bitch? Like, who's the two-faced bitch of the group? And then they're all of a sudden friends again. Like, it's kind of funny and cutesy, but it's been played out so many times that it just did get a little bit, like, old. I will say, though, Kyle was a highlight. Kyle is always just a saving grace, usually, of an episode. With this, okay, it's kind of hilarious, but a lot of, like, Western cartoons have episodes where characters get terrified of germs. Like, they learn about germs and they're terrified. It happened in an episode of Invader Zim. It happened in an episode of Hey Arnold. Like, people, there's so many shows where a character will just, it's like a plot line where they'll become afraid of germs and microbiomes. But it took a really cute spin on that oddly common trope. So I thought that was a really cute part of the episode where he eventually began to, like, accept the germs. He's just like, they are me, you know?
Yeah, and I thought it was actually pretty in character for Kyle, too, because he's kind of, like, been shown to be a little bit of a germaphobe before. And he also is, like, that total character who, like, overthinks everything and kind of, like, freaks himself out. So I thought that not only was this episode great in the way, like, it used him to kind of, like, find the spice at the end, but it also, he had a pretty good character arc, I thought.
I can't believe I have to, like, congratulate writers on writing their characters in character. But I will say, what I did like about this episode was that the boys really felt like themselves. You know, they were very well written for this situation. Stan, Kyle, and Cartman all did what I would expect them to do in this kind of situation. Kyle reacted exactly how you would expect. So the boys were written really, really well in this episode.
Definitely agree with that. Want to move on?
Let's move on to Basic Cable.
Aired December 4th, 2019.
Scott Malkinson's hopes of romance with the new girl Sophie depend on him getting the streaming platform Disney+. But Scott's dad, Clark, embarks on a mission to stop streaming shows in South Park. This kind of felt like a classic South Park episode as well. It's very standalone, which I love. I love that they're focusing on Scott Malkinson. His cute little intro was adorable. So that was really fun. And, you know, it talked about an issue that's, like, pretty mundane, but it had, like, a cute little quirk to it, you know? It talked about how cable's just kind of going out of fashion, probably because in a lot of ways, it's a little bit of an outdated service.
Yeah, and I really loved the montage of, like, the cable company guys, like, dilly-dallying around, and they're like, okay, yeah, I'll be right there, and then they, like, stop at McDonald's, take a nap, blah, blah. Like, that's me when I'm procrastinating. But yeah, that whole montage was really funny, and I loved how they kind of turned it on his head, too, where, like, Scott's dad, like, would do that, but then he would, like, get mad when the other guys did it to him.
Yeah, and it's very reminiscent of something like Handy Car, where it talks about, like, the evolution of ride sharing, you know? In a similar way, this is kind of like the evolution of TV, where he's like, I like the argument where he's talking to Butter's father and saying, like, so you really rather have something create niche, incredible markets that you can pick for specifically? And he's like, yeah, I think I really would. That sounds great.
Yeah, I also liked Scott's storyline with Sophie, I think her name is. Yeah. The new girl who has diabetes. I loved that whole thing where, like, he thinks that, like, she's his dream girl just because she has diabetes. Like, they don't have anything else in common. That's all he knows about her. And it is kind of funny how, like, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of a lot of, like, romance movies where it's like, these people really don't know anything about each other, but just one thing they have in common, suddenly they're, like, soulmates. That was funny.
It was a very cute and wholesome ending. In general, it was just a very, like, well put together episode. It stood on its own. It didn't leave anything, like, really hanging. You know, it was fun to get into the kind of world of Scott Malkinson. I laughed my ass off when his dad went, I'm Scott Malkinson, I have diabetes, you know?
Yeah, I was so happy to see the return of that.
Like, Scott is a very, like, fun character, and it's nice, because it's really cool that, you know, they don't do this very frequently, where they'll go into the secondary children characters, as well. You know, it happened with, like, the lice episode with Clyde, and we get a little bit of focus with Tweek and Craig every now and then, but, you know, we've never had one that was just dedicated to Scott, and it was really, these are always, like, they're few and far between, but they're really, like, cherished when we get them, and I feel like they put a lot of thought into building these characters that we kind of only know for like one trait and making them more three-dimensional.
Yeah, I always love that. I always love when the secondary characters get kind of their 15 minutes of fame and we get to know more about them. I especially loved the joke where, like, all the other boys are also, like, into Sophie, like, just because she's new, and they're all like, oh, hey, Sophie, you want to come over? Blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, let's go, Sophie. And then Scott would be like, and Scott! Like, he would get so mad. I thought that was really funny.
It was just a very cute episode, you know? That's the perfect way of describing it. I thought, you know, it didn't have, like, this massive, huge commentary about a major issue. It was just something kind of, like, simple, you know? And it's always nice getting those kind of episodes. So, just, like, a really nice, refreshing episode for a lot of things that were going on. The season was pretty, like, storyline heavy for the most part. Not as heavy as, like, some of the other continuated seasons, but, you know, still really nice.
Yeah, totally. All right, do you want to go on to the finale?
Yeah, we'll go on to probably the most boring Christmas episode out there, Christmas Snow.
Aired December 11th, 2019.
Santa visits South Park and takes all the joy out of Christmas with his warnings about driving under the influence. Randy helps the townspeople get into the festive spirit by selling them cocaine.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. You've watched the episode now. Congratulations. There's the end. I know it may sound like I really hate this episode, and there's nothing about it that makes me angry, but it was just... I remember after finishing it, I was like, that's it? Oh, okay. That was your finale? Oh, all right. Sure. Okay. You know, it left a lot to be desired.
Yeah. I did like the way they used Santa in this episode, though, where he kind of is, like, using his platform to, like, speak truth to a really important message. And everyone in South Park, like, did just not want to hear it. And I like that they kind of compared him to, like, Greta Thunberg, where they're like, oh, she's such a bummer. Like, that was so funny. Like, it's like, and it is kind of true. Right, and it's kind of true because, like, I mean, Santa and Greta are both, like, talking about a really important issue, and it's really, like, they're going out of their way to do it, and that's really good. But it's also, like, it is kind of true that, like, whenever you hear from her, she always is saying something that's a bummer.
It is. So it was... I also really liked the children being so naive about it, because that actually worked in the episode's favor. I think they were just like, oh no, they're Christmas spirit, and it's really just them being drunk and high, just trying to get through the holidays. They talk about, I don't know, the cocaine thing was very casual, which in a way made it kind of funny, because I don't know about you guys, but when I got to college, I found out people use cocaine, like, so casually. Super, super casually. And I guess it's the same for South Park. Because no one has a moral objection to it, like, at all. I mean, Santa, yes, and then Jesus, but then they both, like, totally accept it like it's nothing.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. I did like the message that it kind of, or that Santa was kind of driving home most of the episode, where, like, drinking and driving is dangerous, obviously, but, like, driving while you're high is also, like, just as dangerous. And it's kind of interesting because it is, like, an important discussion, at least, to have if you're going to legalize marijuana.
You know, and honestly, driving under any sort of influence is something that South Park has talked about a lot. Okay, they talk so much about road safety. They had one with elderly drivers way back when. They had Randy, like, drunk driving. They have this episode. They had the one where put down the phone if you're president, where kids were getting hit by cars looking at Twitter and everything, or while the drivers were looking at Twitter. So, I mean, I guess Matt and Trey are really road conscious.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, good on them. I also really loved the initial joke when, like, the mayor hauls in Randy for, like, selling cocaine. She's, like, all mad at him. And she's like, cocaine is illegal. And he's like, it is?
What?
He's like, oh, okay. And then I like the whole montage where he, like, goes and gets, he's like, all right, give me a minute. And it, like, takes him, like, a second to get it to be legal.
Because it is kind of funny where it comes to, like, drug legalization. In a lot of ways, there are some things that are just so easily, like, made legal, while other things are just a hassle. Mm-hmm. So, kind of funny. But it was just a little bit boring. Especially for a season finale. You know, this seemed like it would belong better in, like, the middle of the season or something like that. But it's just a little bit lackluster, in my opinion, for a finale.
Yeah, I was literally just about to call it lackluster. I think that's a great word to describe this episode. It wasn't bad, but it was kind of just forgettable.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have too much to say about it. It had, like, a general message and anything, which is always kind of nice, but then, like, it had the message at the beginning, and then it just kind of threw it out the window towards the end. So, I don't know, I was just kind of like, what's the purpose of it? What was the purpose of this episode, other than to, like, bring Randy back in with, like, Tegridy Farms and stuff?
Yeah, Matt and Trey were like, it's been too long since we had a Tegridy Farms Randy episode. We have to bring him back somehow. And we're all like, please, God, no.
Please don't. Please don't bring him back. But, of course, I'm sure next season we'll have another big old bout of Randy.
Of course. Ugh. Well, that's season 23.
Say what?
Well, that's season 23.
That is season 23. I think we did okay. You know, we were a little bit rusty, but honestly, doing that Q&A podcast kind of helped us out a lot. We always enjoy recording and everything, and the season podcasts are no exception. Please tell us what you think about this season. You know, do you agree with our points? If you disagree, we don't care. I'm just kidding. Tell us why. Tell us what you liked, disliked, and definitely ask some more questions, because we are always down to answer them.
Yeah, we love kind of interacting with you guys and talking to you about the episodes and things like that. You can obviously leave, like, comments and suggestions in the comment section, but I don't know, Shirley, if you want, I guess we could put our, like, Tumblr and Twitter handles if you want to come ask us questions on there.
Possibly someday, or maybe, I don't know if anybody's interested, maybe we'll do, like, an email, like a special Podcasa Bonita email, and make it a little bit more official. But for now, we love looking at YouTube comments, so yeah, definitely feel free to add some of those if you want. We can be those stereotypical YouTubers, say like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. But honestly, we don't care. Do whatever you want, as long as you're just having a gay old time.
Well, thanks for joining us again after a year. We will hopefully see you much sooner than that. We have kind of a few things in the works, so I hope you guys are excited about that.
And definitely give suggestions, because we are pretty close to doing a video game podcast. So before that happens, if there's anything in specific that you want us to talk about in regards to it, like I kind of mentioned before, either in this episode or the one before, we're not really doing like a Let's Play style, but if you want to see a little bit of game footage, like, let us know. And yeah, thanks again for watching.
Bye, guys.
Bye.